The Nebraska wind had a way of speaking to you, low, steady, and always with a hint of judgment. Jacob Myers listened as it whispered through the skeletal cornstalks of his dying field, a sound like dry paper being crumpled in slow motion. He wiped the sweat and rust from his palms and stared at the irrigation pump, half-gutted and useless like so many other machines on this patch of earth. The sun was punishing, high and indifferent, baking the cracked soil until it looked like a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces. It was the kind of morning that made hope feel like a fool's investment. His toolbox sat open beside him, its meager, contents barely enough to patch a leak, let alone revive the ancient pump. A bead of sweat ran down the bridge of his nose and dropped to the parched ground, vanishing on contact. In the distance, his lone red barn leaned slightly westward, battered by years of storms and bad harvests. The cattle, what few he had left, were clustered near the shade of the elm tree, tails twitching at invisible flies. Then came the sound. It started as a whisper in the wind, low and rhythmic, not quite thunder. Jacob squinted into the horizon. Dust rose in a churning column beyond the far fence line. He knew that sound. Hadn't heard it in years, not since the governor had once landed during a drought crisis half a state away. The thumping grew louder, unmistakable now. A helicopter, not medevac. Too smooth, too sleek. Jacob stood blinking against the sun. The black chopper broke through the dust like a blade through canvas, rotors slicing the air with arrogant precision. It came in low over the cornfield, scattering dried husks into the air. The cows bawled and scattered. Jacob shielded his face with one hand as wind from the rotors whipped the fields into a frenzy. It circled once before descending with surgical confidence into the open patch of dirt by the silo. The downblast sent Jacob's faded ball cap flying off his head. He didn't chase it. He just watched, rooted in the dust, as the aircraft settled with the finality of a gavel. The door opened. A woman emerged, tall and straight-backed, her silhouette framed against the glare like something out of a dream or a memory. She wore designer boots that probably cost more than his truck, and a trench coat cinched tight at the waist. Her dark hair was pinned in a no-nonsense twist, but a strand had come loose and danced in the breeze. Jacob felt something old and sharp stir in his chest. She looked at him the way someone looks at a photograph after a decade, part sure, part searching. Then she smiled. "Jacob Myers," called out over the still spinning rotors, "you haven't changed a bit." He took a step forward, boots crunching on gravel. "Vivian Langford," he said, squinting. "You got taller." She laughed, rich and genuine. "It's been 10 years. Jacob didn't laugh. "What the hell are you doing in my field?" Vivian stepped down from the chopper, her boots leaving delicate prints in the dust. "I'm here to return a favor." He sat in the shade of the barn an hour later, the chopper shut down, silence falling heavy and strange between them. Vivian had refused water but accepted a black coffee, poured from Jacob's old thermos. He'd scrubbed his hands on a towel and put on the least dusty flannel shirt he had, though it still smelled faintly of diesel and defeat. "I thought about writing first," she said, sipping. "But I knew you wouldn't answer." He didn't deny it, so I came in person. Jacob crossed his arms. "Don't suppose this is a social visit?" "No," she admitted. "It's not." The wind moved through the cornfield, quieter now. Jacob waited. Vivian leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "You saved my life, Jacob. That night in Wyoming, you didn't just pull me out of that wreck. You stayed with me. You kept me warm, made sure I stayed awake, tied my leg with your jacket to keep it from swelling." Her voice softened. "You hiked 5 miles through a snowstorm carrying me. I never forgot that." Jacob looked away. "You were just a kid." "I was 17. You were 24. Volunteer EMT with a busted knee and a second-hand rescue kit. Don't pretend it didn't matter." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I didn't do it for gratitude. You didn't take anything then. Not even the reward my father tried to send you. I'm not a man who takes charity." Vivian smiled faintly. "Neither am I. Which is why I'm offering you a deal." Jacob stiffened. "Here it comes." We're building something, she said, setting her coffee down. Langford Innovations is launching a pilot agricultural project using drone mapping, vertical irrigation, AI-assisted soil analysis. We've identified Nebraska as the ideal region. Your land sits on a groundwater table perfect for sustainability trials. You want to buy me out? He said flatly. No. I want to partner. You'd retain ownership. We'd fund the modernization, pay you a salary to oversee it and share in the profit. Your land becomes the flagship, a model for regenerative, tech-driven farming. Jacob stood, walking to the edge of the barn's shade. Sounds like corporate farming with lipstick. It's more than that. It's legacy. Whose? Mine or Langford's? She rose, brushing dust from her coat. Both. But I came. Here alone for a reason, Jacob. My father doesn't know I'm offering this. He wants to deal with the bank and let you default. He sees this as just land. I see more. Jacob turned to her, his eyes hard. Why? Because of that night? No, she said quietly. Because I've watched from afar year after year and you never sold out. You worked until your back broke. You took care of your neighbors. You buried your wife and kept your son in school when half the county folded. That kind of man doesn't deserve to drown in silence. Jacob's jaw flexed. You've been watching me? Every year on the anniversary, I'd check. I'd see your name in co-op minutes, sometimes on court dockets when the bank tried to push foreclosure. You never asked for help? I don't ask. Well, I'm not waiting for permission. She stepped closer. The offer is real. The partnership is real. But more than that, her voice cracked slightly. I needed to come see if the man I remembered still existed. Jacob searched her face for deception, for arrogance, for pity. He found none. From across the field came the distant clatter of metal. One of the cows had kicked over a trough. Jacob looked toward the land that had owned him as much as he'd owned it. Then at the woman who had once been a stranger in a snowstorm, and now stood like some emissary from a future he hadn't dared to imagine. I'll think about it, he said finally. Vivian smiled. That's all I ask. That night, as dusk painted the sky in bruised purples and fading gold, Jacob sat on his porch. A single porch light flickered overhead, more firefly than beacon. In the barn, the wind moved gently through hay. Out in the field, the black helicopter waited, silent now, its sleek body catching the last traces of light like the promise of something just out of reach. Inside the house, a photograph sat framed on the mantel. Rachel Myers, beaming in front of the same cornfield in better days, her hand resting on Jacob's chest. Her eyes held that familiar glint, the one that used to see further than he ever could. Jacob stared at the picture, then back out to the field where the rotors sat idle. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But something had shifted, and somewhere deep beneath the dry soil and unpaid debts a seed had been planted. The dream returned that night, the same one that came every winter when the first snow hit the earth like a warning. It always started with silence, the kind of thick, absolute quiet only a whiteout could bring. Then the crunch of boots over snow, the howl of wind slicing through pine, and then the girl, half buried in the drift, face pale, one arm twisted beneath her, red coat torn at the sleeve, her lips whispering something Jacob never fully understood. He always woke up before he got her to the cabin. This time was no different. Jacob's eyes opened to the soft amber hue of dawn pouring through the lace curtain in his bedroom. Outside, the rooster was late again, but the cows made up for it. He sat up slowly, joints stiff, neck aching. Another day. Except not quite. The helicopter was still out there, and so was she. By the time he stepped outside, Vivian was already in the field, walking the boundary lines in a black wool coat and leather boots that weren't meant for mud. She had a small tablet in one hand, fingers dancing across the screen. She looked perfectly at ease, as if boardrooms and billionaires and backwoods were all the same to her. You always start this early? She asked, without looking up. Jacob took a sip of coffee from his chipped blue mug. Sun comes up whether I like it or not. Vivian turned. You sleep all right? Better than you, I bet. She raised an eyebrow. Because I'm a Langford or because I slept with a chopper in my backyard? He gave a non-committal shrug. Vivian pointed the tablet toward the soil. Do you know your nutrient levels? Here, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Jacob set his mug down on the fence post. I know when the corn dies too early and when the beans don't flower. That's my nutrient test. She glanced back at the screen. The data matches. You've been working land that's exhausted. No rotation, no cover crop, you're bleeding yield every season. You sound like one of those boys from Lincoln with a fresh ag degree and no dirt under their nails. I've got plenty of dirt under mine, she said calmly. Just not Nebraska dirt. Jacob watched her walk the perimeter, stopping now and then to take photos or samples. He hated how competent she looked, how clean, and yet, he couldn't forget that storm. 10 years earlier, in the foothills near Jackson Hole, a storm had moved in so fast it erased everything in 20 minutes. Visibility had dropped to nothing. A private black SUV had slid off the road at an unplowed switchback and plowed into a ravine. Jacob had been in the ranger's hut 3 miles up, off duty but still checking weather stations. When the call came, over the volunteer band, he'd gone without thinking. Snowshoes, pack, flares, rope. He wasn't even a trained paramedic then, just a man with a stubborn streak and a sense of guilt he'd never quite managed to scrub out. He'd found the girl under the passenger side door, still conscious, leg pinned, windshield shattered. She was in shock, mumbling something about Aspen and a missed flight. Name? He'd asked, trying to keep her awake. Vivian Langford, she'd whispered. My father's going to be furious. Let him be, he'd replied, wrapping her in his coat. He can yell at me if he wants. They'd spent the night in a decommissioned ranger station, huddled beneath wool blankets, while snow stacked against the walls like the end of the world. She talked. About boarding school in Switzerland. About hating math. About her mother's death. About never being allowed to make mistakes. Jacob remembered thinking how strange it was. This girl with a broken leg and billionaire blood. Suddenly, so fragile, so human. She'd fallen asleep with her hand in his. He hadn't let go until the rescue team arrived the next morning, and then she was gone, swept up into limos and legal forms and thank you letters he never opened. Now she stood, at the gate again. We're flying to Omaha this afternoon, she said, eyes still on her tablet. I want you to see the headquarters. Jacob blinked. What? Our pilot's ready at noon. It's a short flight. You can be back before dark. I didn't. Say yes. You said you'd think about it, she said evenly. This is part of thinking, seeing what's being offered. I don't need a dog and pony show. No, Vivian said. You need to stop fighting a war you've already lost and start building something new. Her voice wasn't cruel, just direct. The way it had been that night in the cabin, when she'd asked him if he ever wanted to leave the mountains. Jacob picked up his mug. The coffee was cold now. He took a long swallow anyway. I have a son, he said at last. 13. Caleb. Vivian's gaze softened. Will he come with you? If I go anywhere, yeah. He doesn't have anyone else. Good, she said, because our program doesn't just help farms. It builds futures. Tech training, youth education, scholarships. Jacob studied her. Why does it matter to you? Vivian walked a few steps closer. Because I remember the man who carried me through a blizzard and didn't take a damn thing in return. And I've spent a decade surrounded by people who never do anything without calculating the cost. Maybe I just want to back someone who doesn't flinch when the sky goes black. The wind picked up. It smelled faintly of burned grass and rusted metal. Vivian turned toward the house. We leave at noon, she said. Or you can stay here and keep patching pumps with parts from 1985. Either way, I'll still remember what you did for me. She walked away. Jacob stood for a long time, mug in hand, watching her retreat toward the barn, where the helicopter waited with its engines warming. In the distance, his cattle meandered toward the trough. A hawk circled overhead, casting a narrow shadow across the field. He thought about Rachel, about the promise he'd made at her bedside, never to give up the land, never to let their son grow up without roots. But what if roots could still grow, in new soil? What if keeping that promise didn't mean staying stuck? At 11:52 a.m., Jacob walked into the house, changed into a clean shirt, grabbed his father's old field journal from the mantel, and called for Caleb. At noon sharp, the helicopter lifted into the sky. The world looked different from the air. From a few thousand feet above Nebraska, the cracked dirt and browned-out stalks of Jacob's farm gave way to quiltwork fields stretching endlessly in every direction. Green squares, gold rectangles, irrigation circles like ancient symbols carved into the land. Caleb pressed his face to the chopper window, wide-eyed. "Is that the river? It looks like a snake." Vivian, seated across from them, smiled. "That's the Platte. Used to be, called a mile wide and an inch deep. It's how settlers followed west." Jacob barely nodded, his eyes on the horizon. He'd flown once before during wildfire season up in the Tetons. That chopper had smelled like fuel and fire. This one smelled like leather and air conditioning. He wasn't sure which unsettled him more. The city came into view as a gray silhouette that sharpened quickly into towers, rail yards, wide expressways. As they descended, the Langford Innovations campus revealed itself. Glass buildings surrounded by geometric gardens, solar panel roofs, white electric vehicles gliding silently across paved walkways. The landing pad was atop the main building, marked by a subtle L logo etched into the steel. Caleb's eyes were huge now. "Are we landing on the building?" Jacob braced himself as the chopper touched down. The moment the rotors slowed, a suited assistant opened the side door. "Ms. Langford, Mr. Myers, welcome." Inside, the building was hushed, cold, immaculate. A cascade of green walls, vertical gardens, stretched 3 stories up. LED lighting mimicked sunlight. Techs in lab coats passed silently, holding tablets, and prototypes that glowed faintly in their hands. "Smells like a hospital," Jacob muttered. Vivian smirked. "Wait till you see the soil lab." They passed through security with a wave of her ID, then rode a glass elevator down 2 floors to what Vivian called the heart of it. The room was the size of a gymnasium, with rows of long stainless steel counters, each featuring miniature grow plots under precise lighting arrays. Technicians adjusted moisture levels, tested nutrient combinations, and input readings into digital dashboards. "This is where we simulate the farm of the future," Vivian explained. "Down to the acre. We track evapotranspiration, microbial balance, drone calibration for leaf surface analysis." Caleb leaned over one of the miniature plots. "Is that real corn?" "Real as it gets," she said. "That sample's grown with 37% less water than your dad's field, and yields more." Jacob didn't speak. He ran a calloused hand along one of the tabletops. Everything here gleamed. The opposite of his world. The temptation was obvious. Too obvious. They moved next into a conference room, where a sleek presentation waited on a curved screen. Vivian dismissed the assistant and sat opposite Jacob, this time without a tablet or notes. Just her. "What I'm offering," she said, "is full backing. We invest in your land. Install modern irrigation, renew your equipment, stabilize your crop output. In exchange, you agree to a partnership. You'll host trials, share your results, publicly represent the transition from traditional to tech-based farming. You'll be paid a base salary plus a performance share." Jacob crossed his arms. "In other words, I become a Langford poster boy." "No," she said carefully. "You become a symbol of survival. A farmer who adapted instead of disappearing." He didn't respond. Vivian tapped the armrest. "Let me be blunt. My father's team has already drawn up a separate plan. If you decline this offer, the company will make a bid to buy the land outright. After the bank seizes it, they'll strip it, automate it, and turn it into a data field for sensor trials. So this, Jacob said, leaning forward, is charity with strings. No, she snapped, her voice sharper than before. It's a lifeline, one you earned a decade ago when no one else was there for me. But it's also a contract, and I won't lie to you, this deal comes with expectations. Jacob stood, walking to the window. The city buzzed beneath him. Not a tractor in sight. I've seen deals like this, he said, at co-op meetings. Big firms come in with glossy videos and sweet talk, and 5 years later half the farms are gone, replaced by carbon offset fields or automated wheat plots. What makes this different? Vivian met his gaze. Me. He turned. My father doesn't believe in people. I do. I believe in you, Jacob. Not just because of what happened in that blizzard, but because you kept going when everyone else folded. You never sold out. That kind of grit, that has to be part of the future. He let out a slow breath. Behind him, Caleb sat silently, eyes bouncing between them. Vivian stood, walked to a cabinet, and pulled out a thick folder. This is the contract. I want you to read it. Take your time. You can bring it home. No pressure. Jacob took the folder but didn't open it. Why'd you really come yourself? She paused. My father doesn't trust people he didn't hire. I knew you'd never sign if he came. But you think I'll sign because you did? No, she said softly. I think you'll sign because you want Caleb to have a future you can't give him anymore. Not alone. Silence settled in again. Then Caleb stood up. Can we see the drones? Vivian smiled. Absolutely. The drone bay was in a separate building, long, low, and humming with soft automation. Rows of small insect-like machines hovered silently under infrared lights. A technician guided Caleb through a simulation while Jacob leaned against a pillar, watching. This place runs like a machine, he said quietly, as Vivian stepped beside him. That's what scares you, isn't it? I spent my whole life trying to keep humans on the land, he said. Machines don't cry when a field floods. They don't know the smell of rain before it hits. Vivian nodded. But they also don't quit when the market crashes, or when banks raise interest rates. They don't get cancer, or lose their wives. Jacob's jaw tightened. That was low, she met his eyes. It was honest. He looked back at Caleb, now laughing as a drone mapped his face in pixels, so much like Rachel in the way he tilted his head when confused. You know, Jacob said. Rachel would have hated this place. She would have asked the same questions you're asking, Vivian agreed. And then she would have fought, like hell to bend it into something good. He looked down at the folder in his hands, felt the weight of it. This isn't a yes, he said. But it's not a no, she replied. He nodded. They left the drone bay as the sun began to dip toward the west. The helicopter waited again, its doors open, the same path home ready and waiting. As they lifted off, Jacob looked down at the city, then at the fields that followed it. Somewhere far out past the grid lines was a barn tilting west, a boy with too much weight on his shoulders, and a decision he hadn't been ready to make until now. Vivian sat beside him, silent, letting him choose the silence this time. And in that stillness above a world too fast and too clean, Jacob Myers began to see something new take root. The helicopter's downdraft kicked up so much dust that the porch curtains tangled themselves in the screen door. Jacob had barely stepped down before Caleb bounded toward the barn to feed the cattle, chattering about drones and laser soil sensors. Vivienne gave a small wave from the cabin and stayed aboard as the aircraft rose again, banking east toward the horizon. By the time it disappeared, the silence felt heavier than the chopper ever had. Jacob stood alone in the yard, folder still tucked under his arm. Something about the stillness after that kind of flight made everything around him look older. His fence posts leaning like tired sentries, the paint peeling from the mailbox like shed skin, and the battered swing set where Caleb used to sit with Rachel when the chemo kept her homebound. He ran a hand through his hair, then headed inside. What he didn't know What he couldn't have known was that half the town had seen the landing. By morning, the rumors had started. It began at Granger's Feed and Seed, like most things did. Tom Harwood was buying oats for his livestock when the cashier, Willa Barnes, asked if he'd heard about that helicopter landing at the Myers place. Whole rig near flattened the scarecrow, she added. Thought it was the National Guard. Within the hour, the conversation had migrated to the co-op office, the diner, and finally the churchyard, where Mrs. Edna Cavell was pruning hedges and telling everyone in earshot that Jacob Myers is selling out to those Langford people. By noon, 3 pickup trucks idled outside Jacob's gate, engines ticking as the heat rose in visible waves from the hoods. He stepped out with a water jug, not expecting company. Not them. Reverend Billers was first to speak. "Morning, Jacob. Got a minute?" Jacob nodded. Always. He leaned on the fence as the 3 men approached. Billers, old Joe Rankin from the co-op board, and Marshall Thomas, who ran a dairy down on County Line. All wore expressions that hovered somewhere between concern and disappointment. "We heard," Rankin said, "that you've been speaking with Langford Innovations." Jacob didn't answer right away. He wanted to lie, brush it off, say it was just some corporate drone demo. But his father hadn't raised him that way. Neither had Rachel. "I have," he said. "They're interested in partnering, not buying." Marshall Thomas scratched his head. "That may be, but folks around here see a helicopter land, and next thing you know, half the county's whispering that you're selling us downriver." Jacob's jaw tightened. "Nobody's selling anything. I'm trying to keep this place afloat." "Reverend," Billers gave a weary sigh. "We all are, son. But Langford, they don't do partnerships. They absorb. You know what happened up in Grant County." "They tore out good sorghum fields and put in solar farms," Rankin added. "Automated wheat silos. Fired half the farmhands." Jacob crossed his arms. "So what am I supposed to do? Wait for the bank to take it and let them sell it anyway, without even having a say?" Marshall Thomas looked away. "You got a point. But still, your land's always been the holdout, the backbone. If you fold, the co-op loses its negotiating leverage. You know that." Jacob's voice was quiet, but firm. "This isn't about leverage, this is about my son." That gave them pause. Reverend Billers stepped forward, eyes softening. "I know, Jacob, I do, but remember, how you fight now sets the tone for the rest of us. We're watching." With that, the men turned and climbed back into their trucks. Engines sputtered, gravel crunched, and the convoy rumbled off down the lane, dust curling behind them like a long, accusing finger. That afternoon, Jacob took the tractor out to the west pasture. He needed space, time, something to do with his hands. The Massey Ferguson coughed but held together long enough for him to hit the fence line, where the south irrigation junction had blown again. He cursed under his breath and climbed down, wrench in hand, already bracing for rusted bolts and cracked seals. But the junction wasn't leaking. It was gone, ripped clean off. The whole panel had been smashed, deliberate, surgical, like someone had taken a sledgehammer to the most vital part and vanished. He stood slowly, the kind of stillness that comes not from confusion, but from clarity. This wasn't accident or neglect. This was sabotage. Jacob turned, scanning the fence line. No tracks, no fresh prints. But he knew the kind of statement this was meant to be. Not everyone was willing to wait for Langford to buy the land. Someone wanted him scared into backing off. That night, the water tank emptied into the field like a split vein. Half the corn would be gone by morning. He sat on the porch with the contract folder in his lap and a beer going warm in his hand. Caleb was inside, writing a school report about the future of agriculture, full of terms Jacob barely understood anymore. Vivian hadn't texted. She didn't need to. The town had done her work for her. It wasn't pressure, the way Alan Langford would have done it, but it was a push just the same. That's when he noticed the truck pulling into his drive. Headlights cut through the dark like knives. A moment of tension curled inside him, until the door opened, and a familiar silhouette stepped out, Maria Torres. She'd been his neighbor for 12 years, widow of a soybean man who died in a grain auger accident. Tough, capable, and the only person who ever brought a casserole without a sermon. She walked up the porch and sat beside him without a word. After a moment, she asked, "You really thinking about it?" He didn't pretend not to know what she meant. "I am," she nodded slowly. "It's your land, your call. Just don't mistake silence for consent. Most of us are scared, Jacob, not angry. We're scared you'll be the first domino." Jacob exhaled. "Maybe someone has to fall first." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe someone needs to find a better way to stand." She reached into her jacket, pulled out a thermos, and handed it to him. "Coffee. You'll be up late thinking." Then she left. When dawn came, Jacob didn't go to the fields. He drove into town, past the diner, past the church, straight to the Langford satellite office that had just gone up near the industrial park. A simple glass door and steel logo. He knocked once. Vivian opened it herself. Jacob held up the folder. "I've got questions." Vivian stepped aside. "Then come in and ask them." They met just after sunrise in the clean-lined conference room of the temporary Langford satellite office. Glass walls and polished concrete floors, sterile and too bright. Vivian sat behind a minimalist desk, no coffee, no tech distractions. Just the thick folder between them and the space of a decision neither could escape anymore. Jacob pulled out a worn legal pad and set it beside the contract. His handwriting was jagged, deliberate. "I've got 18 questions." Vivian folded her hands. "I'm listening." For the next hour, Jacob asked about land rights, co-op revenue shares, community transparency, equipment ownership clauses, data sovereignty. To her credit, Vivian didn't flinch. She answered everything with the cool precision of someone who knew the numbers inside out. But Jacob was less concerned with numbers than with motives. Finally, after the last item, he sat back. "Why didn't you open with all this in the first place? Why the smoke and mirrors?" Vivian leaned forward. "Because I was afraid that if I told you what I was really doing, you'd shut the door. I came with a company pitch, but I stayed because I remembered something else." Jacob stared, out the glass wall toward the waking town. "My neighbors think I'm betraying them." "They're wrong," she said. "But they're scared. Change always looks like betrayal when you're on the edge." He tapped the pad absently with the back of his pen. "They're not wrong to be cautious. I've watched too many farms die under promises. Then don't let yours be another." Vivian's voice softened. "Let it be the first that survives because it changed." He closed the folder. "Let me show you something," he said quietly. The cemetery sat on a slight ridge at the edge of town. Morning light filtered through the oaks, throwing long shadows over the neatly kept stones. It was the kind of place where voices softened instinctively, where everything felt heavier and truer. Vivian followed Jacob along the gravel path without asking where they were going. She noticed his gait had changed slightly, slower, more deliberate. They stopped, in front of a modest headstone nestled beneath a hawthorn tree. The engraving was simple. Rachel Myers, 1984-2017. Let it grow. A small ceramic photo was inset, Rachel laughing, one hand shielding her eyes from the sun. Vivian instinctively stepped back, giving Jacob space, but he didn't move. "She planted that hawthorn herself," he said. "Insisted it would take root better if we dug with our own hands instead of renting a backhoe." Vivian glanced up at the gnarled tree. It leaned slightly but bloomed defiantly in spring. Caleb was 5 when she was diagnosed. She spent her last months writing letters to him, one for every birthday until he turns 18. Jacob swallowed. She believed in this place, even when it hurt her. Vivian's voice was careful. "You still think signing with us would be betrayal?" He didn't answer. "I don't want to erase what she built," she said. "I want to make sure it doesn't get buried next to her." He looked over. "Your mother's buried here?" "No," Vivian said. "New York. Whole cemetery looks like a hedge fund designed it. I haven't visited in years." She crouched, brushing a bit of grass from the base of the stone. She died of an aneurysm when I was 12, Vivian said softly. We were in London. Dad had just closed a merger. He didn't even fly home until the next day. Too much going on. Jacob didn't speak. She was the one who taught me names of trees. The one who insisted I take riding lessons from someone who still used a feed bag and not a biometric monitor. Vivian stood slowly. After she died, I started getting sick on planes, claustrophobia they called it. But I knew what it really was, guilt. Jacob looked at her for a long time. You ever think about leaving it all? He asked. Vivian nodded. Every day. But I'm good at what I do. And if I walked away, someone else would just take my place. Someone who doesn't care what a hawthorn means. She turned toward him. You think Rachel would hate this deal? Maybe she would. But I think she'd hate seeing this land rot more. Hate seeing Caleb wonder why his father died on a hill no one asked him to defend. That hit harder than she expected. Jacob crouched down beside the stone and placed one hand on it. She was smarter than me, he said. Knew how to listen to people. Knew when pride was just fear in disguise. Vivian said nothing. After a moment, Jacob stood, brushing his jeans off. Come on, I've got something else to show you. The western fence line stretched along the edge of the property like a scar. It separated Jacob's land from a corporate plot owned by Conley Harvesting, a silent automated wheat field that ran itself. But today Jacob wasn't interested in the fence. He pointed to the corner post, half charred, the surrounding brush, scorched. Vivian frowned. Fire? Arson, Jacob said flatly. 2 nights ago. Do you know who? He shook his head. But someone's making a statement. Vivian looked around. No security cameras. No footprints left in the dusty earth. Just the evidence of heat and fear. I'm not naive, Jacob said. People here don't want to lose what little control they've got. Some of them are ready to burn down the whole barn just to keep out what they don't understand. Vivian's eyes darkened. Let me install a monitoring system, just temporary, no one has to know. He hesitated. It's not surveillance, she said. It's protection. He looked out at the field, then at the burned post. Fine, he said. But only if I get the override key. She smiled. Deal. That evening, the community hall buzzed with quiet tension. Word had spread that Jacob was going to speak. Half the co-op board was there, even the mayor. Jacob stood at the front of the room, Caleb sitting in the back, swinging his legs over the side of the folding chair. He cleared his throat. I won't take much of your time, Jacob began. Some of you've heard I'm working with Langford Innovations. A murmur rippled through the room. It's true, they've offered to help me modernize the farm, but I'm not selling. I'm not abandoning this town. He let that hang. I've asked them to consider a community model, one where farms don't just survive, but lead. Training programs, youth scholarships, shared revenue tech. Not just on my land, but open to anyone who wants in. That caught their attention. I'm tired of watching us all fight for scraps. I'm tired of seeing our kids move to cities because there's nothing left to come home to. He looked out, over the familiar faces. I buried my wife under that hawthorn tree because we believed in this place. But belief without action is just memory. I'm ready to act. Silence, then a slow clap. From Maria Torres. Others followed. Not all. But enough. Outside, the night air was cool. Vivian waited by the truck. Well? She asked. Jacob stepped beside her, hands in his jacket pockets. They didn't throw me out. Progress. He nodded, looking toward the distant fields. Tomorrow, he said. We break ground. Vivian arched an eyebrow. You're in? I'm in, he said. But we do this my way. She smiled. That's the only way I was ever going to stay. The wind rustled the tall grass. Somewhere nearby, a mourning dove cooed into the dusk, and in that sound, between hawthorn trees and burned fences, the first fragile note of hope returned. The diesel hum of the backhoe broke just after 7 a.m. as Jacob guided the arm into position and peeled the first layer of cracked topsoil back from the edge of the west field. The air was crisp, damp with dew, the kind of morning that used to mean something: renewal, ritual, hope. Today it meant change, real change. Vivian had arrived just after dawn in a black SUV, dressed not for meetings but for fieldwork, cargo boots, windbreaker, her hair tied back. She didn't just watch, she helped. Unloaded crates of sensors, helped string cables between the test plots, recorded data manually while the techs worked out syncing errors. Jacob noticed, and so did everyone else. By noon, 3 of his neighbors had wandered over. Not to help at first, but not to interfere either. Joe Rankin brought a thermos. Edna Cavell brought a folding chair and settled in near the fence line like she was watching history get rewritten. Slowly, others followed. Not just to gawk, to ask questions, to study the blueprint Vivian had printed on a clipboard. And then Maria Torres arrived with a box of sandwiches. "You're building momentum," Vivian murmured to Jacob as he inspected the first sensor hub. "They don't trust me, but they still trust you." "Let's not waste it then," Jacob replied, adjusting the solar panel angle. At 2:13 p.m., the data hub powered up. For the first time in a decade, Jacob Myers Field sent out a signal: coordinates, humidity, soil pH, micronutrient presence, all mapped in real time on a tablet Caleb carried like a prize. The kid looked like he'd been handed the keys to a spaceship. "Dad, this thing knows exactly how deep the water goes under the ridge. It says we've been overwatering by almost 40%. Jacob gave a dry chuckle. "That'd explain the mush roots." Vivian smiled. "Welcome to precision farming." But the celebration didn't last long. By late afternoon, Jacob noticed something strange. A plume of black rising faintly beyond the southern trees, too far to be a controlled burn, too narrow for equipment backfire. He narrowed his eyes. His breath slowed. "Vivian," he said. "Watch Caleb." He dropped his gloves, jogged to the truck, and gunned it south along the fence line. It didn't take long to find the source. Just past the second gate, at the border between his land and the abandoned Wexler property, the western field corner was burning. A shed, empty for years, nothing but old tools and twisted metal, was fully engulfed. And beside it, another corner post had been torched. He slammed the brakes and jumped out. The grass around the fire was dry, volatile. He grabbed the emergency extinguisher from the bed of the truck and hit the base of the flames, cursing as the heat surged back. The blaze wasn't huge, but it had intent. It wasn't carelessness. It was a warning. He got most of it under control before the fire crew arrived, responding to a neighbor's call. One of them, a young guy named Brantley, stepped over. "Fuel can," he said grimly, nodding to the blackened remains near the post. "Not lightning, not accident." Jacob ran a hand over his face. "Any idea who?" Brantley hesitated. "We've been seeing this uptick ever since Conley Corp started expanding. Someone out here's got a grudge, but they're staying careful." "Too careful," Jacob muttered. That night, Jacob stood at the fence line with a flashlight, examining. The damage. The air smelled of smoke and scorched cedar. The sensors in this section had melted. Half a week's work gone. Caleb stood beside him, silent. "Why would someone burn our stuff?" Jacob didn't answer right away, then quietly. "Because sometimes, son, when people can't stop something, they try to scare it off instead." Caleb looked up. "You scared?" "No," Jacob said. "But I'm tired." From behind them came the sound of gravel crunching. Vivian's SUV eased to a stop. She stepped out with a bag of replacement parts in one hand and a thin scar of concern across her brow. "I can have a new unit installed by morning," she said. Jacob shook his head. "We need more than tech now. We need people to see this. Won't stop us." Vivian studied him. "You think it's one of your neighbors?" "No," he said. "Neighbors get mad. This is something colder, more organized." Her expression darkened. "I'll check the land registry. See who's been buying plots near the Conley border." He nodded. And I'll talk to Sheriff Dorsey. Not that he'll do much. I will, she said. Langford's legal team can apply pressure. Jacob looked at her. You think your father's behind this? She didn't flinch. I think he wants you to fold. He's not above lighting matches if it speeds the deal. A silence passed between them like lightning waiting for thunder. Then Jacob turned toward the smoldering earth. Let's show him it didn't work. They worked by lanterns that night, the replacement gear humming quietly as it came online. Maria returned with more food, this time dragging her nephew and two of his friends from the vocational school. We figured we'd learn something useful, she said dryly. By midnight, they'd restored 70% of the damage. Jacob's hands ached. His back throbbed. But for the first time in years, he wasn't alone out here. Vivian sat beside the data station, sleeves rolled to the elbow, her voice low as she talked with Caleb about drone pathing and remote irrigation. Jacob watched them, something unspoken in his chest, warm and dangerous. 2 days later, Sheriff Dorsey came by with bad news and a worse expression. Jacob, he said from the porch, hat in hand. You need to know. We found tire tracks near the burn site. They match a set used by Langford Security, black Suburban custom wheelbase. Jacob tensed. You sure? Dorsey gave a slow nod. We're not going to make arrests without more, but yeah, it points that way. Vivian doesn't know, Jacob said quietly. Maybe she does, Dorsey replied. Or maybe her old man's just playing her like the rest of us. Jacob stared out at the fields, tech now embedded, wires snaking under the soil, sensors blinking like fireflies. The future wasn't approaching. It had already landed. That evening, as the last drone completed its automated pass and the screen lit up with crop efficiency reports, Vivian approached with 2 coffees. You okay? She asked. Jacob took the cup, didn't drink. You said you believed in this, he said, voice low. Even if it meant standing up to your father. I do. Then prove it. Vivian raised an eyebrow. How? Cut him off. Fully. No shadow money. No backdoor. Contracts. You want to do this with me? Fine. But it can't be his empire disguised as my resurrection. For the first time, Vivian looked genuinely shaken. Then she nodded. I'll call the board tomorrow. Freeze all external directives. The Nebraska project becomes its own entity. Jacob stared at her for a long time. Okay, he said, and he meant it. Late that night, under a sky bruised with stars, the sensors pinged green across the board. The data station reported stabilized pH, balanced moisture, and a projected yield 35%, higher than the previous year. Jacob looked at the screen. Then he looked out at the field. He didn't smile, but he stayed. The black car appeared just past noon, crawling over the gravel like a shadow-given form. Jacob saw it first. No county plates, no dust on the fenders, no rumble of an old pickup, just silence and glass and presence. He was repairing the pivot, gear on the central irrigation arm when Caleb shouted from the porch, Dad, there's a car. Jacob wiped his hands on a rag and stood. The sedan slid to a halt at the end of the driveway. From the rear door emerged a man who looked like money had shaped him from the womb. Dark tailored coat, silver hair smoothed back without a strand out of place, and eyes that scanned the farm like he already owned it. Alan Langford. Jacob had never met him, but the recognition was instant. He carried power like cologne, dense, clinging, invisible yet oppressive. Vivian stepped out after him, a few steps behind. No jacket, no smile, her posture stiff as old wire. Mr. Myers, Langford said as he approached, extending a hand with practiced grace. Pleasure, finally. Jacob looked at the offered handshake, then took it. Wish I could say the same. Langford chuckled, as if that mild insult were simply part of the negotiation script. Direct. Good. I appreciate that. Jacob gestured toward the porch. We talking out here, or are you the kind who needs air conditioning to make a point? Vivian winced slightly. Langford just smiled. Out here's fine. They sat at the old picnic table Rachel had built, 3 boards short, one leg uneven. Langford inspected it briefly before lowering himself like a man avoiding infection. Caleb watched from the swing set, the drone controller in his lap silent. Langford got to it quickly. I understand you've been working with my daughter, and I also understand you're now spearheading a pilot program that's garnering interest. Jacob didn't respond. Langford continued. I've reviewed the numbers and the proposal. She's offered you a sweetheart deal, Mr. Myers. But let's be clear, it's not sustainable. Not under our current corporate model. Vivian inhaled sharply. Dad, Langford held up a hand. No, Vivian. Let's speak plainly. You've sunk significant capital into this project. Unauthorized capital. You've risked the Langford name on one farm and one man. Jacob's fingers curled slightly. Langford turned back to him. But it's not too late. We can transition you to a full acquisition. We'll purchase the land outright. Ensure your son's education is covered. Provide a generous exit package. You'll be out before winter. Vivian stood. You're not listening to him. I'm listening fine, Jacob said quietly. I just think I'm done being offered my own life back like it's a handout. Langford chuckled, but there was a harder edge now. Come on, Mr. Myers, you're tired. This place. He waved a hand toward the fields. It's a relic. Vivian's idealism aside. This land doesn't belong to a man with rusted tractors and poetic roots. It belongs to the future. And who decides what that looks like? Jacob asked, standing now too. Langford's smile dropped. People who know how to shape it. Jacob stepped closer. Let me tell you something. This soil's been in my family for 3 generations. Every inch of rust and regret you see out here, it's bought and paid for with calloused hands and sleepless nights. You want to buy that with a check? Langford's jaw worked. You're emotional, I understand. But we're offering peace. No, Jacob said. You're offering silence. I've buried too much on this land to let a man like you pave over it. For a long moment, the two men just stared at each other. The breeze tugged at Langford's coat, but he didn't move. Neither did Jacob. Then Langford turned to Vivian. This is what you bet on? A man with pride and no plan? Vivian's voice was steel. I didn't bet, I believed. Langford's lip curled slightly. Belief doesn't scale. You're right, she replied. But it builds, and that's what you've forgotten. Langford's gaze cooled. This isn't over. Jacob leaned forward slightly. Sure, it is, you're on my land. Langford stared for a beat longer, then he turned, walked back to the sedan, and slid inside. The door clicked shut like a sentence ending. The car reversed slowly, then eased back onto the county road. Only when the dust had settled did Vivian let out a breath. Well, she muttered. That went better than expected. Jacob raised an eyebrow. That was better? Trust me, she said, sitting heavily on the porch steps. If he'd been polite, it would have meant he was planning something worse. Jacob nodded. He always liked that. Only on days ending in Y. Caleb approached now, curiosity twitching behind his gaze. Was that the guy with all the money? Jacob looked at Vivian. He's got money, she said, but not the kind that matters here. The next morning, an email arrived from Langford Legal. Vivian read it on her tablet under the hawthorn tree, while Jacob and Caleb loaded soil samples into the test bins. Her expression didn't change, but her knuckles whitened, Jacob noticed. Bad? Not yet, she said, but they're freezing all shared accounts. The funding pipeline's being investigated. Cutting you off? She nodded. Not just me, the project. We've got a week of operating liquidity left. Jacob dusted off his hands. Then we better get loud before that week's up, by nightfall. He had made 6 calls, to the regional ag network, to a tech journalist in Des Moines, the university extension program that once offered Caleb a middle school scholarship. He told them all the same story. A farmer and a daughter of a billionaire are building something better. They're not waiting for permission. By dawn, hashtags were trending. By noon, a local news van rolled up the driveway. Jacob stood before the cameras with his boots in the dirt and the contract in one hand. Caleb stood beside him. Vivian, just behind, arms crossed, a quiet storm in her posture. "This land isn't for sale," Jacob said into the mic. "It's for learning, for building, for everyone who ever believed that progress doesn't have to mean bulldozers and buyouts." That night, the coverage ran statewide. Langford Innovations didn't respond. But silence, in this case, spoke volumes. Back on the porch, Vivian sat beside Jacob in the dark. "You could have taken his offer," she said. "No shame in that." Jacob shook his head. "I've got a boy who needs to see what standing looks like. That's worth more than a college fund." She looked at him. "And what do you need?" He thought for a moment. "I need to know I wasn't wrong to hope again." She reached into her jacket and pulled out a document, Langford's revocation of her internal clearance. She tore it in half. Then again. "You weren't," she said. Above them, a drone passed overhead, soft and steady, its lights blinking. Against the stars, a different kind of guardian, one Jacob had chosen for himself. The mailbox flag was down when Jacob passed it on his way to the Westfield that morning, but the envelope inside stopped him cold. It wasn't the name on the return address. He expected lawyers now. It was the postmark. New York, Langford Holdings, Legal Division. He tore it open on the tailgate of the truck, the rising sun casting long shadows across the gravel. The paper was thick, too formal even for a cease and desist. But it wasn't a threat, it was a reminder. An old one. Jacob frowned. The letter referred to mineral rights, not surface property. A document he barely remembered signing years ago, when Rachel was sick and the hospital bill stacked higher than the silo. Vivian found him still staring at the letter when she arrived an hour later. "What is it?" she asked, stepping down from her truck. Jacob handed it to her. She scanned it, eyes narrowing. Then slowly, a smile crept across her face. "I was wondering when this would show up," she murmured. He looked at her sideways. "You knew about this?" Vivian nodded. "I bought the mineral rights to your land 3 months ago." Jacob blinked. "Why the hell would you do that?" "Because your father-in-law was about to sell them to Langford Energy, and once that happens, you lose control of what's underneath your feet. They can drill, test, claim easement rights. They'd own the whole bottom of your farm." He folded his arms. "So you just bought them out from under them?" "I didn't want to involve you until it was finalized," she said. "If I'd failed, you'd never know. But now, you own the land. I own the minerals. They can't do a damn thing without our joint consent." Jacob stared at her. "You maneuvered me." "No," she said. "I protected you before I even showed up." He didn't respond right away, just looked out over the fields where the first irrigation drone was rising to begin its mapping sweep. Then his voice dropped. "I don't like being played, even by allies." Vivian winced. "I didn't think of it as playing you." "No?" he said, turning toward her. "You bought leverage over me, came with a deal I couldn't refuse, used a contract I didn't even remember signing. I didn't come to trap you, Jacob. I came because I knew someone had to stand between your land and what my father does to everything he touches. But you didn't tell me. I wasn't sure you'd still be here if I had," she said. That cut deep. Jacob looked away, jaw working. Vivian stepped closer. "I made a mistake. I should have told you from the beginning, but I didn't lie." He nodded slowly. "But you omitted. That's enough to make a man wonder what else you're holding back." She looked at him, the wind tugging at her coat. "You want out? Say the word." He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the drone station and ran diagnostics. She waited. 20 minutes passed. Then he finally turned to her, hands on his hips, expression unreadable. "I'm in. But from now on, no more shadows." Vivian nodded. "Deal." They sealed it with a handshake, this time rougher, realer, not forged in nostalgia or stormy rescue memories. But something closer to equality. That afternoon, the sheriff stopped by again. Not about fire, not about tire tracks, but about property zoning. "You've got a challenge on your land use permit," he said, standing on the porch like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Filed this morning by Conley Holdings." Jacob didn't blink. "On what grounds?" "Claims your new drone installations constitute a commercial research facility. Says it violates the zoning district's ag-only clause." Vivian appeared behind the screen door, arms crossed. "That's weak." "Sure is," the sheriff said. "But it buys 'em time, forces you into court, drags this out." Jacob looked at Vivian. "What do we do?" "We countersue," she said. "And I subpoena every document showing Langford's interference. We expose the game." "Won't that drag you down too?" the sheriff asked. Vivian's eyes sharpened. "I'm already off the reservation, might as well set fire to the whole map." The sheriff whistled. "Well, good luck." As he left, Caleb came jogging up with his tablet. "The moisture maps are off," he said. "Sensors say we've got sublayer dryness east of the pivot arm." Jacob checked the feed. "Damn, you're right." Vivian leaned over. "Looks like we need to recalibrate." Jacob stared at the screen. "Looks like we've got a harvest coming, whether the law likes it or not." The next day, a legal team from Des Moines arrived. 2 young attorneys Vivian had trained herself. They set up shop in the old barn, stringing extension cords and laptops off the same generator that once ran the milking pump. Caleb dubbed them the barn barristers. "They're scrappy," Vivian said, "and they owe me favors." Jacob handed them copies of the zoning deeds, the mineral rights record, and Rachel's old co-op agreements. "Find me the cracks," he told them. They smiled. "We're not here to find cracks, Mr. Myers. We're here to widen them." By midweek, reporters were back, but this time they weren't asking if Jacob was selling out. They were asking how he was still standing. Vivian handled most of the interviews. She spoke of innovation without displacement, of partnership instead of profit, and of a farmer who once carried her through a storm and never asked for a thing in return. Jacob listened to her from a distance. She'd grown tougher, smarter, maybe more dangerous. But she'd chosen to fight for something instead of inherit it, and that made all the difference. That night, they sat on the roof of the barn, watching the drone paths flicker against the dark. "Caleb's drone report got picked up by the AgTech Youth Awards," Vivian said. "He's being invited to present in Denver next month." Jacob nodded. "He'll go, but only if you take him." She turned to him, surprised. "Why not you?" "Because I've got harvest coming. And court. And a town that needs to know I'm not abandoning them the moment this gets hard." Vivian looked at him. "That's the farmer in you. And what are you?" She thought for a moment. "The storm that brings change." Jacob chuckled. "Fitting." They watched the stars for a while, the quiet around them deep and strange. Not peace, but something close. When Jacob finally spoke again, it was almost a whisper. "What if we lose?" Vivian turned her head. "Then we lose with the truth on our side," she said. "And that still counts for something." He nodded. "Yeah, it does." Below them, the barn glowed with soft light. Inside, 2 lawyers scoured contracts. Outside, a farmer and a girl he once saved now stood shoulder to shoulder against a world that wanted them divided. And above, the harvest moon rose full and sharp, painting the fields in silver. The meeting was called for 6 a.m., not to be clever, but because that's when farmers showed up, coffee thermoses in hand, boots still damp with dew, eyes clearer than any boardroom would see by 10. The church hall smelled of burnt toast and diesel and hope worn thin. 17 folding chairs faced the old podium where co-op meetings had been held since 1951. Jacob sat in the front row, a legal pad on his lap, Caleb beside him wearing his best plaid shirt and carrying a USB drive. Vivian stood in the back, leaning against the wall like someone used to being both the target and the defense. Joe Rankin, longtime co-op president and reluctant referee, banged his gavel against the scarred podium. "All right, folks. We're here to vote on the proposed alternative to the Langford Holdings land acquisition, a community-owned tech agriculture pilot led by Jacob Myers, with support from private investor Vivian Langford. There were murmurs. Some skeptical, some supportive, none indifferent. Jacob rose and took his place behind the microphone. He didn't bring slides, just a story. "My father died trying to keep our land in the black," he began. "My wife died before we ever saw a profitable harvest. I've worked this soil with frozen fingers, broken ribs, and a heart so heavy some days I wasn't sure I'd get out of bed." He scanned the faces. Edna, arms crossed. Marshall Thomas, neutral. Maria, Torres, solid. Even the pastor frowning into his coffee. "But last week," Jacob continued, "I watched my 13-year-old son diagnose a sub-layer soil issue faster than I could say compaction. I watched our yield forecast jump by 30% because of a drone he programmed himself." He pointed toward Caleb, who flushed red but held up the tablet. "This isn't about me anymore. It's about what we hand off. The land will outlive us. The question is, will our kids want anything to do with it?" There was a pause. Then he reached into his back pocket, pulled out Rachel's old journal. "My wife wrote something the week before she passed. She said, 'We don't own the farm, we borrow it from those who'll need it more than we do. That's why I'm standing here.'" He nodded toward Vivian. "She didn't come here with her father's offer. She came despite it. She backed me when no one else would." He turned back to the room. "We don't have to die out. We can adapt, together. This isn't just a pilot, it's a blueprint. And I'm asking you to vote for the future." Silence, then Joe Rankin cleared his throat. "All right. All those in favor of adopting the Myers pilot co-op proposal signify by raising your hand." Hands rose. Maria first, then Edna, then half the room. All eyes went to Marshall Thomas. The dairyman looked down at his boots. Then he slowly raised his hand. The vote passed. By one. A breath released across the room, collective and quiet. Then the clapping began. Vivienne didn't smile right away. She just let herself exhale, for the first time in days. Jacob turned, looked toward her, and in that glance, something unspoken settled between them. Not just victory, but trust finally earned. That afternoon, a new sign went up by the front gate of Jacob's farm. Nebraska AgTech Co-op Pilot Program locally owned, future built. A photo of Caleb smiling beside the drone appeared in 4 regional papers and a national AgTech blog within 48 hours. The media framed it as an unlikely partnership between a widow farmer and a corporate heiress. Neither of them corrected it. Let them tell it how they want. The truth ran deeper than print. Langford Holdings responded within a week. A press release announcing a new regional expansion. Nothing overt, just a warning shot cloaked in PR gloss. Vivian read it on her tablet and tossed it into the passenger seat. "They're coming again," she said. "I figured," Jacob replied, tightening a bolt on the new sprayer arm. "You worried?" He shook his head. "I've got more behind me now than I ever did when I stood alone." She smiled. "You sound like a leader." He stood, dusted off his gloves. "I sound like a man who's tired of fixing everything with duct tape." Vivian walked beside him to the ridge. The field below pulsed with life. Rows uniform, moisture-balanced, growth accelerated. But it still felt like a farm. No glass, no wires showing. "Funny thing," she said. "All my life I thought the future was clean lines and perfect efficiency." Jacob glanced at her. "And now?" "Now I think the future is messy and human, and worth the bruises." He nodded. "I should go," she added after a beat. "Denver conference. I promised Caleb I'd be there when he presents." "You'll do fine," Jacob said. "Just don't let him talk you into wearing one of those carbon-neutral tech vests." She laughed. Then something shifted in the silence between them. Not the past, not just the future, but the possibility of something that could finally last. That night, Jacob sat on the porch, Rachel's journal open beside him, pen in hand. He turned to a blank page and began to write. "To Caleb, someday you'll ask how we saved the farm. The truth is we didn't. We just stopped trying to do it alone." A light blinked on at the drone station. Field 3 had reached optimal growth index. Jacob closed the journal, stood and looked out over the land. Then he smiled. Slow, real, earned. In the distance, a convoy of pickups rolled down county line. Not protest, not intimidation, but the next generation of farmers, ready to ask what came next. The meeting was called for 6 a.m., not to be clever, but because that's when farmers showed up, coffee thermoses in hand, boots still damp with dew, eyes clearer than any boardroom would see by 10. The church hall smelled of burnt toast and diesel, and hope worn thin. 17 folding chairs faced the old podium where co-op meetings had been held since 1951. Jacob sat in the front row, a legal pad on his lap, Caleb beside him wearing his best plaid shirt and carrying a USB drive. Vivian stood in the back, leaning against the wall like someone used to being both the target and the defense. Joe Rankin, longtime co-op president and reluctant referee, banged his gavel against the scarred podium. All right, folks, we're here to vote on the proposed alternative to the Langford Holdings land acquisition, a community-owned tech agriculture pilot led by Jacob Myers, with support from private investor Vivienne Langford. There were murmurs, some skeptical, some supportive, none indifferent. Jacob rose and took his place behind the microphone. He didn't bring slides, just a story. My father died trying to keep our land in the black, he began. My wife died, before we ever saw a profitable harvest. I've worked this soil with frozen fingers, broken ribs, and a heart so heavy some days I wasn't sure I'd get out of bed. He scanned the faces. Edna, arms crossed. Marshall Thomas, neutral. Maria. Tor is solid, even the pastor frowning into his coffee. But last week, Jacob continued, I watched my 13-year-old son diagnose a sublayer soil issue faster than I could say, compaction. I watched our yield forecast jump by 30% because of a drone he programmed himself. He pointed toward Caleb, who flushed red but held up the tablet. This isn't about me anymore. It's about what we hand off. The land will outlive us. The question is, will our kids want anything to do with it? There was a pause. Then he reached into his back pocket, pulled out Rachel's old journal. My wife wrote something the week before she passed. She said, we don't own the farm, we borrow it from those who'll need it more than we do. That's why I'm standing here. He nodded toward Vivian. She didn't come here with her father's offer. She came despite it. She backed me when no one else would. He turned back to the room. We don't have to die out. We can adapt. Together. This isn't just a pilot. It's a blueprint. And I'm asking you to vote for the future. Silence. Then Joe Rankin cleared his throat. All right, all those in favor of adopting the Myers pilot co-op proposal, signify by raising your hand. Hands rose, Maria first, then Edna, then half the room. All eyes went to Marshall Thomas. The dairyman looked down at his boots, then he slowly raised his hand. The vote passed by one. A breath released across the room, collective and quiet. Then the clapping began. Vivian didn't smile right away. She just let herself exhale, for the first time in days. Jacob turned, looked toward her, and in that glance, something unspoken settled between them. Not just victory, but trust finally earned. That afternoon, a new sign went up by the front gate of Jacob's farm. Nebraska AgTech Co-op Pilot Program, locally owned. Future built. A photo of Caleb smiling beside the drone appeared in 4 regional papers and a national AgTech blog within 48 hours. The media framed it as an unlikely partnership between a widow farmer and a corporate heiress. Neither of them corrected it. Let them tell it how they want. The truth ran deeper than print. Langford Holdings responded within a week, a press release announcing a new regional expansion. Nothing overt, just a warning shot cloaked in PR gloss. Vivian, read it on her tablet and tossed it into the passenger seat. They're coming again, she said. I figured, Jacob replied, tightening a bolt on the new sprayer arm. You worried? He shook his head. I've got more behind me now than I ever did when I stood alone, she smiled. You sound like a leader. He stood, dusted off his gloves. I sound like a man who's tired of fixing everything with duct tape. Vivian walked beside him to the ridge. The field below pulsed with life. Rows uniform, moisture balanced, growth accelerated. But it still felt like a farm. No glass, no wires showing. Funny thing, she said. All my life I thought the future was clean lines and perfect efficiency. Jacob glanced at her. And now? Now I think the future is messy and human, and worth the bruises. He nodded. I should go, she added after a beat. Denver conference. I promised Caleb I'd be there when he presents. You'll do fine, Jacob said. Just don't let him talk you into wearing one of those carbon-neutral tech vests. She laughed. Then something shifted in the silence between them. Not the past, not just the future, but the possibility of something that could finally last. That night, Jacob sat on the porch, Rachel's journal open beside him, pen in hand. He turned to a blank page and began to write. To Caleb, someday you'll ask how we saved the farm. The truth is, we didn't. We just stopped trying to do it alone. A light blinked on at the drone station. Field 3 had reached optimal growth index. Jacob closed the journal, stood, and looked out over the land. Then he smiled. Slow, real, earned. In the distance, a convoy of pickups rolled down county line. Not protest, not intimidation, but the next generation of farmers. Ready to ask what came next.